I call the member for Pittwater.
Mine's fast.
I move that the bill be introduced for an act to amend the Road Transport Act 2013, the Road Rules 2014, and other legislation to provide for the regulation of sale, ownership and use of e-bikes and for related purposes.
The question is that this bill now be introduced. All of those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I bring up the bill, an electronic copy of which has been provided to the clerk already, and move that this bill now be read a second time. Mr Speaker, I rise today to introduce the Road Legislation Amendment E-Bike Regulation Bill 2025. Now, this bill is about getting the balance right when it comes to e-bikes. It provides a framework to preserve the profound benefits of e-bikes while confronting the equally real risks, illegal riding, severe antisocial behaviour and the escalating crisis of injuries on our roads and footpaths. Whether you love them or hate them, and in my electorate there is a distinct divide, e-bikes are a permanent fixture in our suburbs. They've transformed how people move, they facilitate the decarbonisation of our transit, and no doubt will be embraced as fuel prices can increase and soar as a result of what's happening in the Middle East. They also reduce local vehicle congestion and provide unprecedented independent mobility, particularly for young people to get to school, sport or their friend's place without relying on their parents for lifts. But we must face a reality that the e-bike is not a push bike. It is consistently faster, significantly heavier, and capable of doing far more harm when misused. Legal models alone can weigh up to 50 kilograms before a rider climbs on, potentially with passengers and even modifications. The kinetic energy and impact grow exponentially. We have witnessed an exponential explosion of these devices in New South Wales, from under 10,000 sales in 2017 to a staggering estimated 760,000 e-bikes currently in circulation around the state. Our communities are grappling with the consequences of this rapid saturation, and some suburbs do feel a bit like the Wild West, particularly at certain points of the day, with riders weaving through traffic at or above 50 kilometres per hour sometimes, doing wheelies and riding without helmets or protective gear. The most pressing consequence of this regulatory void is a public health crisis which is unfolding in real time. Data recently released by St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney shows that serious injuries from e-bike accidents have jumped 350% since 2023. Last year alone, there were 200 severe e-bike related presentations to the trauma team. We're not talking about grazed knees, we're not talking about ruptured bowels, we're talking about ruptured bowels, severe head trauma and complex fractures. This trauma is deeply felt in my own community. In Mona Vale, a man in his 50s was tragically killed in a collision with a truck, and in Dee Why, a teenage girl was left in a critical condition after crashing on a steep road. In another horrific incident, a 7-year-old girl was knocked down by a teenager riding at speed through a shopping arcade. Mr Speaker, you cannot seize and crush your way out of a systemic safety crisis. The government is focusing entirely on the end game, punishment and confiscation, without doing anything to establish the rules of the game first. And although there are rules, and many of them aren't being enforced at the moment with a plethora of illegal e-bikes, what I am talking about is leading with a licensing and registration system. I also want to acknowledge that age limits while play a role, and I know in Western Australia and Queensland the 16 age limit and 14 in Victoria is either implemented or being considered. They do play a role, but recent data from Victoria, as reported on the weekend, shows that when it comes to, and this data was on e-scooters, but when it comes to e-scooters injuries, half of those were with children aged 10 to 14, even though there is a limit where under 14s are not meant to be riding e-scooters. So we know that those rules, even if implemented, may be ignored and are likely to be ignored. And so that's why I'm very supportive of New South Wales being the first state to implement a licensing and registration scheme. Under the current Road Transport Act, e-bikes and traditional bikes are treated in essentially the same way, and they are legally the same. So a penny farthing is legally the same as a bicycle and a push bike, and that is the same as a legal e-bike also. This bill creates a clear distinction and legal distinction between e-bikes and push bikes. That foundational change then allows for a new Part 1A of the Road Transport Act to grant statutory rulemaking powers to the Minister to establish a comprehensive licensing and registration scheme specifically for e-bikes. I want to note that this bill does not prescribe a licensing and registration scheme, and I also want to acknowledge that there is severe complexity around regulating e-bikes. It is something that impacts both state laws, federal laws, and we also need to have regard to what other states are doing as well. So this bill that I am speaking to today, it merely allows the Minister to have the powers to establish a licensing and registration framework. Licensing ensures riders using the network will actually understand the road rules before they ride. And that's, from a first principles perspective, something that my community strongly agrees with. Registration and visible number plates mean that enforcement officers, local councils and the public can see at a glance whether a bike is legal and accountable. A visible registration system removes the anonymity that fuels antisocial behaviour, and, for instance, rideouts, the recent incident where e-bikes tore up Longreef Golf Course on the Northern Beaches, and also the incident which was well publicised on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And I note in these circumstances, it's not a matter of whether a bike is illegal or legal, whether it's 500 watts or 250 watts. Any e-bike can engage in that type of behaviour and is able to get away with it more readily because of the speed at which a bike goes, even a legal e-bike. And that's why having a licence plate leads to better accountability and also assists enforcement. If a rider breaks the rules, a number plate allows police to follow up afterwards, just as they do with cars, rather than engaging in a dangerous chase. And I also want to note that it has been difficult for police. Even last year in 2025, there was a case where a police person was convicted, and I don't have this specific charge, but I think it was around dangerous driving, which resulted in death, and that was in relation to pursuit of a 16-year-old who had stolen a dirt bike. So we know that chasing any rider on a bike is dangerous, and as a result there is a role for number plates to help and assist with enforcement. And we know that licensing and registration works. We only need to look at our waterways. In Pittwater and across New South Wales, children as young as 12 can legally operate a motorised boat. They do so only after completing a course that teaches maritime rules, the physics of stopping distances, the risks associated with driving a boat, and also the consequences of ignoring them. Through that process, they gain respect for the water, for the law, and for the authorities who can hold them to account through a visible registration system. We also already have proof of licensing and registration of e-bikes. The E-Bike Safety Australia has a high school program which is being trialled at schools in New South Wales and Queensland. That includes Cronulla High and recently St Luke's on the Northern Beaches. It combines road rule education with visible ID plates on student bikes. Now, following the implementation of this program, school principals have reported that weekly complaints about students riding recklessly dropped a whopping 95%, from more than 40 complaints a week just down to 2. Respect was restored because education was paired with visible accountability. I do also want to note now that EBSAR, this group, has sought to consult with the government numerous times, and the government has not yet taken them up on the offer, and I would call on the government to consult with EBSAR about their program. I'm well aware also of the counter-arguments against registration, but I do reject them. Opponents claim it was too bureaucratic, too costly, or creating a barrier to active transport. Mr. Speaker, a barrier to entry for e-bikes is the $3,000 cost of the e-bike itself, not a modest annual registration fee. And if designed well, these fees can contribute to directly funding the physical, separated bike infrastructure our communities are crying out for. A registration framework will also prepare the ground for insurance, and whilst this bill does not directly legislate for insurance to be required, a licensing and registration system create the necessary structure. Currently, victims of e-bike collisions are left financially stranded. And in my electorate, a member of the Northern Beaches, not in my electorate, but in a neighbouring electorate, a member of the Northern Beaches community faced a $38,000 medical bill. She was knocked down by an e-bike and has limited avenues for recourse. So we must close this void, and I do support insurance for e-bikes. This bill also amends the road rules in relation to bicycles and footpaths. Under existing New South Wales rules, children under 16 and adults accompanying can ride on footpaths at the same speed as the adjacent road. And in the era of e-bikes, this means a 50 kilogram fat bike carrying 2 people can legally hurl past toddlers, the elderly, and other pedestrians at the speed of a motorcycle. So I am supportive of putting in a 10 kilometre speed limit on footpaths, and I do note here that due to the complexity, my bill amends the Road Transport Act in terms of providing a different legal definition for bikes and e-bikes. It does not do that for the road rules due to the complexity, although that's an area where I think there needs to be further reform. So what I have done instead is just merely amend a speed limit to 10 kilometres per hour on footpaths, and that would apply to bicycles and e-bikes also, and it wouldn't change the fact that only 16-year-olds and under can ride bicycles and e-bikes on footpaths. There is more reform I think that needs to be done in that area, but for simplicity I've focused on the 10 kilometre limit. Now 10 kilometres has been mentioned in the Queensland and WA inquiries into e-bikes, and I note the New South Wales inquiry mentioned a 15 kilometre limit instead. There is a lot of complexity, and we must also tackle retail and manufacturing loopholes, and at present too many bikes are sold as compliant 250 watt or 500 watt bikes only to be digitally unlocked within minutes, whether that's the throttle, whether it's the speed or the wattage. And so a buyer may leave the shop with a legal bike, press a few buttons and suddenly have an illegal bike. More work needs to be done there as well. In the interim, this bill will amend the Road Transport Act to insert a new section 148AA, making it crystal clear that tampering with or digitally unlocking a bike to exceed speeds or power limits is an unlawful offence. If people want a high-powered electric motorbike for use on private property, they can still purchase them, but those vehicles have absolutely no place on our public roads. Finally, we cannot manage what we can't measure, and this bill inserts section 281 to the Road Transport Act, requiring that e-bike death and injury data to be distinctly collected, reported annually and tabled in this House. Right now, e-bike trauma is often ambiguously grouped with analogue bicycles or pedestrian data, masking the true scale of this crisis. I want to be very clear about what I want and don't want. I don't want teenagers dying on our roads. I don't want adults dying on our roads. I don't want people being charged with manslaughter like they have been in WA and also Queensland because they've lost control of an e-bike. I don't want older people and people with disabilities living in fear of being knocked down. Inquiry after inquiry, state after state, one solution, which is registration and licensing, continues to be skirted around. I think New South Wales should be the lead state when it comes to implementing licensing and registration. If there is a e-bike utopia, which I'm sure there is, I'm not suggesting that this bill gets us all the way there, but I do hope it's a step in the right direction. It puts pressure on the government to consider licensing and registration, and I know the Coalition has announced that they're supportive of licensing and registration for under 16s. So may this discussion continue. I look forward to the debate in this House, and I commend the bill to the House.
I thank the member. I call the member for Monero to move that this debate be now adjourned.